The Forgotten Prisoners, Hidden Abuse Inside America's Oldest Jail. The Wall That Never Spoke. Before you dive in, hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to hear isn't a story, it's a confession buried behind 100 years of concrete and silence. Holmesburg Prison stood like a fossil in the heart of Philadelphia, its gray walls older than the city's modern skyline, its halls echoing with whispers no one dared to trace. Built in the 1890s, the prison was meant to hold the most dangerous men in the state. But by the 1950s, something darker had begun to fester behind those steel doors, something that even time tried to forget. It started with a single body. On a cold January morning in 1958, a guard named Leonard Franks was making his routine rounds through the old D block. The air was thick with disinfectant, the kind that burned your throat if you breathed too long. Franks paused outside cell 204. It was silent. Too silent. Inside he found inmate Charles Dunn lying on the floor, skin pale and patchy, eyes rolled back. A strange rash spread across his neck and chest. The cell smelled of chemicals. When the prison doctor arrived, he didn't seem surprised. "Another one," he muttered under his breath. The warden ordered the file sealed. Cause of death, unknown illness. Within hours, the cell was scrubbed clean, the body tagged, and the paperwork filed away under miscellaneous. But rumors began to spread, whispers of prisoners being taken at night, returned days later with bandaged arms and shaking hands. They called it the clinic. No one knew what it was, but everyone feared it. Outside the prison, a young reporter named Evelyn Ward caught wind of something strange. Inmates' families were sending letters claiming their loved ones were disappearing inside Holmesburg. Some returned sick, others never came back. Evelyn, ambitious and relentless, started digging through hospital records. She noticed a pattern: prisoners listed as participants in what appeared to be medical trials, funded by private companies. The deeper she looked, the worse it became. A memo leaked from the University of Pennsylvania's dermatology department hinted at clinical exposure tests, conducted at Holmesburg, testing the effects of new chemical compounds on human skin. Evelyn's heart raced as she read the words, application of dioxin and other agents in controlled cell environments. She knew dioxin, one of the most toxic chemicals known to man. But how was it being used on inmates? And why were prison officials pretending it didn't exist? Her first visit to Holmesburg was brief. She was escorted by Warden Kinsley, a man with a politician's smile and a soldier's eyes. "There's no story here, Miss Ward," he said, his voice cold but calm. "Holmesburg is a model of reform. The men here volunteer for research programs. It helps science, and gives them purpose." But Evelyn noticed something odd as they passed through D block. Every cell door was shut, except one. Inside she saw a man sitting on his bed, his face covered in burns, his hands trembling. He didn't look up, but she heard him whisper as they walked by, "Tell them we didn't say yes." That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She replayed those words over and over. "Tell them we didn't say yes." Days later, a brown envelope arrived at her office with no return address. Inside was a set of black and white photos, grainy, clinical, and terrifying. Inmates strapped to tables, nurses applying strange ointments, a clipboard labeled Project Derm. The last photo made her stomach twist, a close-up of Charles Dunn, the man from cell 204, with chemical burns across his torso and a note scrawled beside it, "Patient expired. Further observation not possible." Evelyn looked at the name printed at the bottom of the form, Dr. Albert Kligman. The same doctor credited with creating some of the most famous skincare treatments in America. Her hands trembled. The date on the form was the same day Dunn died. And in the margin of the photo, written in faint pencil, were 3 words that would haunt her forever. Holmesburg never forgets. But when Evelyn tracked down Dr. Kligman's assistant the next day, what he revealed changed everything. The experiments. Philadelphia, 1960. A winter fog clung to the streets, thick as regret, as Evelyn Ward walked up the cracked stone steps of the University of Pennsylvania's medical building. Inside, the corridors smelled of old paper and alcohol wipes, the kind of sterile scent that tried too hard to hide the rot underneath. She was there to meet someone who had finally agreed to talk. Dr. Harold Raines, assistant to Dr. Albert Kligman, the man who had turned Holmesburg Prison into a human laboratory. When Evelyn entered his office, she found him sitting behind a pile of folders, his face pale, his eyes darting toward the door like a man being watched. "You shouldn't have come here," he said quietly. "They don't like questions." Evelyn laid the photographs from the envelope on the table. "Then maybe they'll answer these." Raines stared at the images, inmates strapped down, chemical burns on their backs, forms signed with single initials. He sighed. Kligman was a genius, no doubt. But genius doesn't always come with conscience. The prison gave him something he couldn't resist, test subjects who couldn't say no. He told her how, during the 1950s, pharmaceutical and chemical companies had started funding dermatological studies inside Holmesburg. New products, new compounds, even new forms of tear gas, all tested on prisoners in exchange for small cash payments. A few dollars per patch, Rains said, his voice breaking. They thought they were helping. Some didn't even know what was being used on them. Evelyn leaned forward. How far did it go? Rains opened a drawer and pulled out a folder labeled Confidential, Project Whitecoat. Inside were reports of exposure tests, not just on skin but lungs, eyes, and bloodstream. Chemical agents that could scar tissue, cause organ failure, even alter DNA. We were told it was safe, Rains whispered. But we all saw what happened. We just kept writing the data. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance. Evelyn's pen stopped mid-scribble. You knew about this for years, she said. Why now? Rains looked at her, eyes glassy. Because I found the list. The real one. Not the volunteer list, the ones they never consented. He slid an envelope across the table. Inside were names, inmates marked Test Group B. Next to each, the word involuntary. At the top of the page was a signature. Warden Kinsley. Evelyn's pulse quickened. She had been inside those walls. She had looked into Kinsley's eyes, calm, calculating. He knew, she whispered. Rains nodded. He approved it. The state paid him to cooperate. They said it was for science, national security even. But when things went wrong, they buried it, along with the bodies. A cold wind rattled the window behind them. Evelyn tucked the papers into her coat and stood to leave, but Rains caught her wrist. Don't go to the prison again, he said. They're watching. Once you start digging at Holmesburg, you disappear. 3 nights later, Evelyn did it anyway. With a small camera and a borrowed ID badge, she entered the prison after dark, disguised as a hospital assistant. The infirmary was quiet, just the hum of fluorescent lights and the faint drip of a leaky pipe. She moved through the corridors, past cells that smelled of bleach and despair, until she found a locked door labeled Medical Storage, Restricted. Inside were rows of metal cabinets filled with glass vials, faded labels reading Compound 47A, Human Skin Trials, Subject 312. Her camera clicked again and again, capturing everything. Then she froze. From behind her came a voice, low, familiar. Miss Ward. You shouldn't be here. It was Warden Kinsley. He stepped into the room, his face expressionless under the harsh light. You're making a mistake. These men volunteered. They wanted purpose. Evelyn stood her ground. You call that purpose? Burning their skin off for a paycheck? Kinsley's jaw tightened. You have no idea what this place really is. He gestured toward the corridor. You think the doctors were the worst of it? Look deeper. The real experiments weren't medical. They were behavioral, psychological. They wanted to see what isolation does to the human mind. Her heart thudded. Who's they? He smiled thinly. The same people who told you this story doesn't exist. Before she could respond, 2 guards entered. Kinsley nodded toward her. Escort Miss Ward out. She's lost. The next morning, when Evelyn tried to call Dr. Rains, his phone line was dead. By noon she heard the news. He'd been found in his office, unresponsive. Official cause, suicide. But the police report listed something odd. His desk drawer was empty. The list he had shown her was gone. And on the edge of his desk, in faint pencil, someone had written the same chilling phrase Evelyn had seen before. Holmesburg never forgets. The silent files. The night after Dr. Rains' death, Philadelphia was drenched in rain. Evelyn Ward sat by her window, staring at the storm as it lashed against the glass. Her notes were spread out across the floor. Names, dates, coded experiment logs, and one haunting phrase that tied them all together. Holmesburg never forgets. She couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Rains' pale face, his trembling hands as he passed her that envelope. Now it was gone, stolen before he was found dead. The police had ruled it a suicide. Evelyn didn't buy it. 2 days later, Evelyn drove back to Holmesburg Prison, this time as an accredited journalist with a forged assignment letter from the Philadelphia Inquirer. The warden's office reluctantly approved her request, a short, historical tour of the facility for an upcoming piece about prison reform. It was the only way in without raising suspicion. Inside, the air was thick with damp concrete and the faint metallic tang of rust. The guards led her through the east wing, long corridors lined with peeling paint and flickering lights. She kept her small voice recorder tucked in her coat pocket. "Most of these blocks haven't been used since the 60s, one of the guards said. "We only keep a few cells open for maintenance staff." Evelyn nodded, pretending to jot notes. But her eyes were scanning every hallway, every locked door. When they passed a rusted gate marked "Medical Records, Restricted Access," her pulse jumped. "Can I take a quick photo of this sign?" she asked innocently. The guard hesitated, then shrugged. "Make it quick." As she raised her camera, she noticed something scratched into the metal plate just below the sign, a word almost rubbed away by time. "Listen." That night, back in her motel room, Evelyn reviewed the photos. Most were ordinary, until she zoomed in on the medical records door. Through a narrow crack, she saw a sliver of paper taped inside. Enlarging it further, she realized it wasn't a random paper. It was a file tag, and the visible portion read, "Subject 47A, Ward E." Her name. Her breath caught. How could she have a file? Before she could process it, her phone rang. The number was blocked. She hesitated, then answered. A man's voice came through, hoarse, urgent, whispering. "You're in danger. They know you took pictures." Evelyn's hand trembled. "Who is this?" "You don't have much time," he said. "The experiments didn't end in the 60s. They moved them. You're not supposed to find out. Then help me. Tell me what they were doing." Pause. Then, softly, check the files under Behavioral Unit C. That's where they kept the ones who didn't die. The line went dead. The next day, Evelyn returned to the prison records archive under the pretense of verifying historical data. She slipped away when the guard's radio buzzed and crept into the restricted section. Rows of old filing cabinets stood like silent sentinels. The labels were faded, many torn off entirely. Then she saw it, Unit C, Behavior Control. Inside the cabinet were folders stamped with government seals. She opened one at random and found grainy black and white photographs, prisoners with electrodes strapped to their temples, pages of handwritten notes describing extended sensory deprivation, obedience trials, and emotional conditioning. She turned to the last page. A familiar signature appeared at the bottom, Dr. Albert Kligman. Her chest tightened. This wasn't dermatology anymore. This was psychological warfare. As she stuffed copies of the pages into her bag, footsteps echoed from down the hall. She froze, killed her flashlight, and crouched behind a filing cabinet. Two voices approached, one of them unmistakable, Warden Kinsley. "She's been snooping around again," Kinsley said. "If she finds the behavioral files, this whole thing blows open." "What should we do?" the other voice asked. "Same as Rain's. Make it look clean." Evelyn's heart pounded so hard she thought they'd hear it. The footsteps stopped inches from her hiding spot. A light swept across the floor, then turned away. The door slammed and silence returned. She waited another minute before exhaling. Then, in the faint beam of her phone light, she saw something that made her blood run cold. A small brown envelope on the floor beside her foot, marked in fresh ink. "To Ward, you're not the first." Inside was a strip of old film negatives. Holding it up to the light, she saw 4 images, each one showing a prisoner hooked up to a machine labeled MK-Delta/Holmesburg 1962. She whispered to herself, Delta? A name she'd only heard whispered in declassified documents about CIA mind control projects. This wasn't a medical study. This was government-sanctioned human experimentation. And now it was clear, the same people who erased Rains were coming for her. That night, Evelyn sent everything she had, photos, documents, the negatives, to her editor, attaching a single message. "If I disappear, publish this." Then she packed a small bag and drove into the night, rain pelting her windshield, headlights cutting through the darkness. Behind her, Holmesburg loomed in the distance, a concrete ghost with too many secrets. As she crossed the city limits, a black sedan appeared in her rearview mirror. It didn't turn when she did. It just followed. The disappearance. The last confirmed sighting of journalist Evelyn Ward was on a rain-soaked Thursday night in November 1978. Her car, a dented green Plymouth, was found abandoned near the outskirts of Philadelphia. Engine still running, driver's side door open, her bag missing. The police report listed it as a possible abduction. The case went cold in under a month. But for Detective Frank Delaney, something about it never sat right. He'd seen plenty of missing persons cases, but none where the missing left behind a folder filled with government-sealed documents and a note that simply read, "If I vanish, start with Holmesburg." By the late 1980s, Holmesburg Prison had long been shut down, its crumbling walls wrapped in ivy and silence. Urban explorers, vandals and ghost hunters came and went, but the official archives remained locked. Delaney, nearing retirement, used an old contact in the state records office to request Evelyn's sealed file under the pretense of reviewing journalistic disappearance trends. When the envelope arrived, it wasn't just thin. It was empty. The only thing inside was a single Polaroid photo, a black and white shot of the Holmesburg infirmary. Scrawled on the back were 2 words: "She's inside." Weeks later, Delaney drove to the prison. The sky was overcast, the air heavy with mildew and the echo of crows. Holmesburg's main gate creaked as he pushed it open. He carried a flashlight and his service revolver, old habits. Inside, the corridors stretched into darkness. He followed the faint sound of dripping water and the metallic clatter of loose chains. Each step seemed to pull him deeper into something that had waited years to be uncovered. He reached the medical wing, the same one Evelyn had photographed before she vanished. The door still bore the rusted sign, "Medical records, restricted access." He hesitated, then kicked it open. The room smelled of rot and formaldehyde. Dust floated through the beam of his flashlight like ash. Rows of cabinets, broken equipment and shattered glass covered the floor. Then he saw it, faintly glowing in the dark, a small red light blinking from a metal console. He crouched, brushed off a layer of grime and found a label burned into the steel. Delta log, active. The power was still running. After all these years. Delaney's stomach turned. He followed the cables running from the console to the back of the room, where a reinforced steel door stood half open. Pushing it aside, he entered what looked like a hidden operating theater. Glass observation panels lined the upper wall. Below, a single chair sat bolted to the floor, surrounded by old medical machinery, EKG monitors, wires, electrodes. And on the wall, behind layers of peeling paint, were photographs pinned in neat, military precision. Each photo showed an inmate. Underneath each, a code. Subject 46C, 47A, 49F. He froze when he reached the next one. 47A, Ward. The photo was grainy but unmistakable. Evelyn, restrained, eyes half open, staring straight at the camera. A fresh chill ran through his body. The image couldn't be from the 70s. The timestamp on the bottom corner read 1983. 5 years after she vanished, Delaney whispered. Before he could react, a faint hum filled the room. The machines around him flickered to life. The red light on the MK Delta console turned solid. Then footsteps. Someone else was in the building. He killed his flashlight and crouched behind the console. Voices echoed from the hall. 2 men, one with a clipped, military tone. Files were never supposed to surface again. Then why leave this place operational? The contract required continued testing. Behavioral control wasn't discontinued, it was relocated. Holmesburg's just a shell now. An off-site lab handles the real work. Delaney's pulse pounded in his ears. He leaned closer to hear. The journalist's records were compromised. If anyone connects her to the modern program, it'll expose everything. And what about the detective? Pause. Then the voice grew colder. He won't be leaving tonight. Delaney ducked behind a row of cabinets as flashlights swept the room. One beam grazed the wall of photographs. The men stopped. 47 is still up, one said. I thought we cleared this. I'll handle it. Go start the generator. As the first man stepped closer, Delaney gripped his revolver, finger trembling. But before he could move, the console behind him beeped. The red light blinked, then projected an image onto the wall. A flickering video feed came to life, black and white footage showing the same room from decades ago. The chair. The electrodes. And Evelyn Ward, alive, struggling, mouthing words into the camera. The man turned toward the screen. What the hell? Delaney sprang from cover, slamming him into the wall. The gun clattered to the floor. The other man shouted from the hall, footsteps thundering closer. Delaney grabbed the fallen ID tag from the man's neck. Department of Defense, Behavioral Research Division. He fired a warning shot and bolted down the corridor, heart hammering. The exit loomed ahead, moonlight spilling through the broken bars. Outside, the rain had started again, the same heavy downpour from the night Evelyn vanished. Delaney stumbled into his car, blood pounding in his ears. He shoved the ID tag into his pocket and drove off, tires screeching on wet asphalt. In the rearview mirror, the prison loomed, but this time, one window on the upper floor glowed faintly blue. Someone, or something, was still in there. 2 days later, Delaney's report hit the desk of a federal agent. Within hours, the case was sealed and all related evidence transferred to secure storage. Holmesburg Prison was scheduled for demolition. But the demolition order was quietly postponed, indefinitely. And somewhere, in a government database buried under layers of secrecy, a new file was added to the MK Delta archive. Subject 58 Delaney F. The files that never die. 15 years after the night Detective Frank Delaney vanished, the ruins of Holmesburg Prison were nothing but a fenced-off wasteland. Weeds grew through the cracked concrete, and the graffiti-covered walls stood like rotten teeth jutting from the ground. The city had forgotten it. The government had erased it. But the ghosts of what happened there refused to stay buried. In 1998, a young documentary filmmaker named Rachel Klein stumbled upon the case while researching for a film about abandoned prisons. Holmesburg wasn't on any official record anymore. Not in the Department of Corrections, not in the National Archives. Nothing. But when she visited the site, she found something strange. At the edge of the property, buried beneath a pile of scrap metal, was an old lockbox, military-grade, rusted but intact. Inside were several undeveloped film canisters, a faded ID tag that read Delaney F., and one roll of microfilm labeled Subject Records 47A, 50A. Rachel had no idea that what she'd found would reignite one of America's darkest secrets. At first, she thought the reels contained standard prison documentation, intake photos, perhaps mugshots. But when she took them to a private photo lab to be digitized, the technician called her back the next day in a panic. "Miss Klein, whatever this is, you shouldn't have it." The technician handed her a USB drive. "These images aren't from the 1950s. They look much more recent, maybe the 80s or 90s. And the people in them, they're restrained. Monitored." Rachel's curiosity turned into dread. When she opened the files, her laptop flickered and a black screen appeared, followed by a single frame of a woman's face. Her hair was matted, her eyes hollow. A timestamp blinked in the corner, May 12, 1983. The name tag clipped to her jumpsuit read E. Ward. Evelyn Ward. The journalist who vanished nearly 2 decades earlier. Within weeks, Rachel's footage gained the attention of a quiet but determined man, Dr. Robert McNeil, a former military scientist turned whistleblower. He contacted her anonymously, agreeing to meet only once in public at a cafe in downtown D.C. McNeil's hands trembled as he slid a folder across the table. "You found pieces of something called Project Delta Horizon. Officially, it was shut down in 1974. In reality, it continued under civilian contracts inside places like Holmesburg. The prison provided test subjects, inmates nobody would miss." Rachel flipped through the papers. They were stamped classified/defense research. Graphs, dosages, and observation notes filled each page. At the bottom of one form, written in blue ink, was a chilling line. Subject 47A shows high cognitive resilience under induced stress conditioning. "That's Evelyn," McNeil said softly. "She wasn't just documenting the experiments. She became one." Over the next several months, Rachel began piecing together the lost puzzle. Government memos, erased court records, and death certificates with altered dates painted a grim picture. Hundreds of inmates were subjected to chemical and psychological trials between 1951 and 1985. But there was one part no one could explain: the continuation of the program after Holmesburg's closure. The experiments didn't stop, they just changed location and name. A single document hinted at where it moved next: Delta Horizon transferred to Site Echo, 1986. When Rachel filed a FOIA request to identify the new site, her submission was denied within 24 hours. The reason listed: national security interests. Then her phone started receiving blank calls. Her apartment lights flickered. One night, she returned home to find her entire hard drive wiped, except for one untouched video file. It was labeled Recovered Footage _1983. In the grainy clip, a man sits at a metal table, restrained. The camera shakes slightly as unseen hands adjust the lens. The man lifts his head. His face is gaunt, his eyes bloodshot. It's Frank Delaney. He looks straight into the camera and says, "If you're seeing this, they're still doing it. Find the names." And it. Then the footage cuts to static. Rachel dropped the camera. Her heart raced as she realized what it meant. Delaney had survived, at least for a time, long enough to leave a message meant for anyone who might find it. But in the background, for less than a second, another face appeared, standing in the observation window behind the glass. Evelyn Ward. She wasn't dead. Or at least she hadn't been when that tape was made. Rachel's documentary, The Forgotten Prisoners, was uploaded anonymously to an independent hosting site in 2001. Within 48 hours, it was taken down. Copies reappeared on underground forums, encrypted, passed through journalists and activists like contraband. The official response from federal agencies was silence. Holmesburg's ruins were finally demolished that same year, but only after workers reported sealed chambers beneath the main infirmary, filled with abandoned equipment. None of it was logged and none of it was released to the public. Today, whispers still circulate through online forums of ex-military contractors, missing research assistants, and prison logs that reference behavioral continuity testing. No proof, no confession, just silence. But some nights, when the moonlight hits the edge of the old Holmesburg lot, locals say they can see a faint blue light pulsing from underground, the same glow that once flickered on the MK Delta console. And beneath that glow, sealed in time, are the names that were never supposed to be found. Evelyn Ward, Frank Delaney, and hundreds of others, listed only as subjects. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one.